Since the 2008 financial crisis, the S&P 500 has beaten the average returns for hedge funds every single year until 2018. And even in 2018, hedge funds only beat the S&P 500 by 0.25%, while the S&P 500 has been destroying hedge funds all the other years. Evidently, the large fees making hedge fund managers rich are making investors poor. But despite all of this, rich people continue to invest in hedge funds. So why do rich people love hedge funds? Well, the thing is, all of these statistics are misleading because they use average instead of the median. One of the basic rules of forming statistics is using the median whenever a sample is heavily skewed towards one side, like hedge funds. The thing is, the top 10 hedge funds by size control $566 billion out of the total $3.2 trillion under management by hedge funds. Considering that there are more than 10,000 hedge funds, this means that the top 0.1% of hedge funds by size control more than a sixth of all funds under management by hedge funds. As a result, if they do good, they have a huge positive impact on average hedge fund returns and vice versa. So just because the average hedge fund return is lower than the S&P 500 doesn't mean the average hedge fund underperforms the S&P 500. To get an accurate view of how the average hedge fund performs, we would have to look at the median return of all hedge funds instead of the average. Unfortunately, this is not available, so we can't tell if the average hedge fund outperforms the market or not. But I think we'd all agree that rich people would be putting their money where they make the most amount of money, and this tends to be smaller hedge funds generally worth well under $25 billion. There is no concrete evidence that bigger funds do worse, but that has been the general correlation. Even Warren Buffett, one of the best investors of all time, has been having trouble beating the S&P 500 the past few years as his funds have grown larger and larger. Of course, value investing like he does and hedge fund investing are not the same, but this shows how having too much money actually makes it harder to invest all of it effectively. Considering this, who's contributing to these large hedge funds that have consistently been underperforming the market? Well, the answer is you indirectly. The vast majority of investors in these large hedge funds are not rich individuals, but rather institutions like banks and pension funds. These institutions have diversification requirements that force them to place a percentage of their investments into professionally managed hedge funds like Bridgewater Associates or Two Sigma. These large institutions aren't allowed to hand over billions of dollars to single managers as they would be seen as too risky, so they're forced to hand over a certain percentage to big funds despite their performance. But this is precisely where the rich have been investing since the financial crisis. Taking a look at this graph, you can see that direct allocations to single managers have been on the rise since 2008, while funds held by hedge fund companies have been declining. As institutions are forced to contribute to hedge fund companies, these funds continue to grow despite bad performance, leaving us to wonder what idiots are investing here. The thing is, we don't realize that it's actually ourselves. Meanwhile, rich people who do invest in hedge funds flock towards single managers or smaller hedge funds and invest based on strategy rather than the prestige, size, or background of the fund. And clearly, this is very lucrative if you invest in the right managers. Taking a look at the top hedge fund managers by returns and consistency, you can see that they make much more than the S&P 500's 8% return or 10% with dividends reinvested or whatever. The exact number is actually quite irrelevant because these guys blow the S&P 500 out of the water, making 30 to 40% returns year after year. Of course, these funds aren't getting these numbers every single year, but there are plenty of hedge funds that have been consistently outperforming the S&P 500. For example, in the 10-year period between 2008 and 2018, the S&P 500 would have grown your money by 156%, or about 2.5 times your money. So if you started with $100,000, you would have $250,000 in 2018. With John Hancock, you would have had $373,000. With Nuveen, you would have had $393,000. And with PIMCO, you would have had $411,000. As you can see, plenty of hedge funds beat out the S&P 500. Now, that doesn't mean that hedge funds are the best option though. Funds you invest in hedge funds require constant monitoring and management to ensure you are continuously beating out the market. The S&P 500 is still one of the best options if you want to just keep contributing mindlessly and still enjoy great returns. In fact, Warren Buffett has told his trustee in charge of his estate to invest 90% of his wealth into the S&P 500 after he dies. This just goes to show how reliable and safe the S&P 500 is. But at the same time, that's why many savvy rich investors love hedge funds and continue to contribute to them. Statistics will often tell you that hedge funds are poor investments, but that's heavily because of large hedge funds that dominate the market using money from institutional investors. In reality, many hedge funds can be very good investments, significantly outperforming the market. Of course, hedge funds have their own set of cons and risks, but don't discredit hedge funds altogether just because you see such statistics. Rich investors continue to grow their wealth every day using such funds. You just have to choose the right one. Make sure to subscribe to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.